meeting is now live streamed. Whakatakata hau ki te uru, whakatakata hau ki te tonga, kia makina kina ki uta, kia mataratara ki tai, he hiake ana, te atakura, he hio, he huka, he hauhu, ti he Māori ora. I've got apologies from Councillor Ropata. I can see Councillor Lee and Councillor Laban, I think from Brisbane, maybe even Ken online. Anybody else? Nope. Okay, do I have a mover and a seconder for the apologies? Councillor Saw and Councillor Gaylor, all those in favour, please say aye. Those opposed, no. It's accepted. Public participation. So we have one item of conflict of interest. Oh, sorry, conflict of interest declarations first. Any conflict of interest declarations for this hui? No. Public participation. Got Graham Clark. Kia ora, Graham. So the tikanga here is 5 minutes to speak. A bell will go at 4 minutes, and then we'll move to questions. In your hands, just press the button on there, and it, you'll go live to people in the universe.
Thank you very much. My name's Graham Clark. I am a member of the Wellington Residents Coalition, but before I retired from work, I was a trade union official and represented Wellington's leak fixers, including when they were employed by the Regional Council. I've had many years of disputes with Wellington Water about leaks in the suburb of Vogeltown. Vogeltown has been a very leaky suburb, so I've come to acquire some knowledge of water and the issues, and this has led me to become absolutely opposed to the introduction of water meters. They'll tell you that water meters will save water, conserve water. Using Wellington Water's figures, our average use of water is 397 litres per person per day. If you take out commercial use, if you take out leaks, the actual use per person per day is 160 litres, which is about the same as Auckland. Auckland has water meters, we don't. So the question is, how much water will a water meter actually save from residential consumption in Wellington? That is a very huge open question. The only honest statement about water meters that I've seen of late has come from Kerry Prendergast. She said we want them so that the water entity can control its own revenue. What this means is that by controlling its own revenue, the water entity will be able to set the cost of water to residents at a rate that covers its prolificacy and covers its ineptitude. Wellington Water's organisation of the repair of Wellington's water network has been appalling. When the Regional Council fixed leaks, I went to the last meeting of the members with the Regional Council, and they told the members that, well done, in Wellington City, you fixed 10,700 leaks. That was in the Regional Council's last year. Last year, Fulton Hogan fixed 3,300 leaks in Wellington City. Therein lies the problem. A leak can be fixed, an average, in 8 labour hours, costing less than $500. Wellington Water now fixes its leaks for $4,500. They don't have enough money to fix the leaks, let alone do the work that's necessary in order to invest in renewing pipes without wasting money. Wellington Water has been an unmitigated disaster in the way in which it has come to carry out its duties on behalf of the residents of Wellington. So, being woefully unprepared for this speech, I'll just leave it there and let you ask what you want to know. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks, Graham. Open for questions. Councillor Conley.
Thank you, Graham, for coming and speaking to us today, and thank you for your continued advocacy around the issues involved in water and water leaks. If we put aside exactly how much it costs to fix a leak and whether that figure is an efficient figure or an inefficient figure, I think you will agree that there is a limit to how much money can be spent on leak repairs. That amount of money is finite. And Wellington Water has to prioritise the biggest leaks in order to save the most amount of money. And it's my understanding that one of the big benefits of water meters is that it allows us to identify the biggest leaks, even where those leaks are underground and not visible to the naked eye, and prioritise fixing those leaks over smaller leaks. What do you agree that is one of the benefits of water meters, and how else can we identify those underground leaks that aren't visible to the naked eye?
Wellington Water currently employs people who have devices that they can stand at a water service vent and identify and pinpoint where leaks are. You don't need water meters to find them. A water meter only identifies a leak past it. Residential water meters will therefore identify a leak in a private pipe. They won't identify leaks in the public system. Wellington Water currently has people who do that right now by putting a device at a water service vent and listening. I had a nice talk to one of the guys doing that work a couple of months ago, and he was very proud about how he'd identified leaks that nobody else could see and pinpointed them to exactly where they took place in the public network. So residential water meters will not actually add anything to that whatsoever.
Okay, further questions? Councillor Staples, then Councillor Kirk-Bennett.
Thank you. And like Councillor Connolly, I'm very appreciative of the fact that you have come in and spoken to us. I do need to ask, though, given that you've just said that the current methods we have for identifying leaks don't identify them on private property, is it not necessary for us to identify those leaks as well? Because if they're just going into somebody's garden or down a hole or back into the wastewater system, that's wasted, treated, potable water. How would you imagine that we identify those leaks and fix those if we don't have water meters?
If you wanted to, you could actually have installed in every private pipe a leak detector, and if you wanted to be super fancy, you could actually have a leak detector that turned the water off when a leak was detected. They do this now in the States. And it's cheaper than installing a water meter and setting up a whole new revenue system to supply the water company with its revenue. I don't believe that the stuff about private leaks is the genuine reason why water meters are being advanced and finding leaks is being advanced. You can identify a leak very simply by standing at your Toby, ensuring everything in your house is turned off and listening to see whether the water is flowing. If the water's flowing and everything's turned off, you have a leak. A water meter will tell you that much. It won't tell you where the leak is. You still need someone to actually do some listening acoustically to the water flow to identify and pinpoint, if the pipe is quite a long one, where that leak is actually taking place. You know, I've had a lot of experience with leaks where I live in Vogeltown. Our pipe is 24 years old and we've had 10 leaks in 20 years. We've had no trouble finding them. Our problem is that the water system is being run so poorly that we've had excess water pressure, and that excess water pressure has caused a myriad of leaks.
Councillor Kirk-Bennett.
Thank you, Graham. I'm hearing what you're saying, but I don't understand your conclusion. We deal with commercial properties which have got water meters on them, and I can tell you in the last year alone, we've found leaks. One of them was over 30,000 litres a day, and it was only because there were invoices coming from Wellington Water to the companies to point out how much water was going through their property. There was no sign of it visibly apart from the metering. And so my question is, why wouldn't we get the same sort of benefit if we had metering to properties? And why it's important is because we don't have to build more dams if we can bring our water use down to about 100 litres per person per day as they have in Melbourne. It seems to me that conserving water is really good for us. Can you comment on that, please?
Yeah, conserving water is good, and there's a lot more ways that it can be done a lot more effectively than installing water meters. One of the problems in the Wellington water system is its excess pressure. In Vogeltown, the pressure averaged 10.2 bar up until they put a water pressure reduction valve in the main and Connaught Terrace. That brought it down to under 8.8 bar, which is where it's actually meant to be. The reason why you have leaks in RO Street, as Wellington Water has told me, is that the reservoir is at the top of the hill and RO Street is at the bottom of the hill. If you're at the bottom of the hill, you get leaks. And that's a cavalier attitude towards its duty of controlling water pressure. If water pressure was controlled, you would have a lot more saving of water. So my answer to you would be, let's create a small team of people employed by the council or Wellington Water or whoever, and have their job to fix leaks at the Toby. Take that off Wellington Water, because they spend half their time going backwards and forwards trying to find out whether it's their leak to fix or a private residence. Have that small team fix the Toby leaks and then get them to go and do a water pressure test on the house. If they do a water pressure test, and they would have done this at mine and found that we had a water pressure of 7 bar and that the water pressure reduction valve in our house was broken, I wouldn't have incurred the leak and thousands of dollars of damage that occurred. That team, by identifying houses that had excess water pressure, could actually save a hell of a lot more water than water meters detecting leaks by ensuring that an effective water pressure reduction valve was in every house, reducing the amount of water that's used. I know from just taking my own shower in the morning, the huge effect that when our water pressure was 3.5 bar instead of 7 bar, how much less water we used. Those are the areas where very cheaply water conservation measures can occur without creating a system based on water meters, which will, if they control the revenue, simply mean that for houses, I've just lost my train of thought.
Good morning. So I represent the Kapiti Coast. Do you live in the Kapiti Coast?
No, I have a brother that lived in the Kapiti Coast and have a very long association with it.
Right. So I was on the Kapiti Coast District Council when we brought in water meters, and within the first year we had savings of 25% of our water usage. So I'm just wanting to know, are you aware that people already pay for their water in other districts such as where you live now?
Well,
Yes or no?
Kapiti's water savings, if you actually look at them, most of it was from fixing private leaks. And why wouldn't you fix them when it's going to cost you an extra $20 a day to pay for the leaks? 84% of the water that was saved in Kapiti was fixing private leaks. Another 6% was fixing public leaks. And water consumption, according to Kapiti Council, hasn't actually altered much over the years since they've had water meters. Hasn't gone up, hasn't gone down. So the point I was going to make on the other matter is that if you have a revenue controlled by the water company, paid directly by residents, what will happen is that all tenants, which is 35% of the population, will get a water bill to pay that they don't currently pay because it's paid by the landlord. It is a huge transfer of wealth from ordinary working people who don't happen to own their own home towards landlords who now escape paying the rates for water. And it's just another example of what's wrong with this country.
I just wanted to follow up. So do you also advocate to not be charged for your personal use of electricity?
Well, personally, I think that if we wanted to solve our electricity problems, we could actually start promoting solar power on people's heads and on people's roofs and connecting it to the house. And, you know, I had a discussion with someone on the way in saying, oh, well, I'd look at my water meter to see how much water I'm using. How many people look at their electricity meter to see how much electricity they're using? I don't know anyone that does that sort of thing. I think that all of these are specious arguments dreamed up by people to justify setting up a company that will control its own revenue and which will eventually impoverish working people. I often characterise water meters as being the neoliberals' wet dream. They're going to turn the working class into the great unwashed.
Okay, Councillor Duffy. Councillor Saw.
Thank you for your detailed knowledge and presentation of the information, Graham. I'm wondering, what would you propose as an ideal model for our water services for the region, given your experience and your passion for the topic? If you could design a system, what would it look like?
Well,
within the time constraints that we have.
What I would believe in is having a water entity covering the same area that we currently have as a minimum, and to make sure that its people are elected so that the citizens have a direct control over the water entity that's set up. There's too much faith in experts who have run the system into the ground and haven't managed it appropriately. And I rather than spending or borrowing and spending on water meters, there's far better ways to target reduction of consumption, reduction of waste, and I don't have enough time to go into all my ideas.
Okay,
if you want to come along to the Wellington City Council on the 7th of November, you'll be able to listen to them.
Okay, this is a quick question of, in which jurisdiction do you think you have witnessed best practice around the world? Like, which would be an international model you think we should follow? It's doing it best.
I can't really answer that question. All I would say is don't send people to England. 83% of the English would like to actually have water.
I think the problems are well known, but yeah.
Okay, thanks, Graham. I think we've exhausted all the questions. Thanks for coming in today.
Thank you.
Right, move on to confirmation of public minutes of the council meeting on Thursday the 26th of September. Item 4 in your agenda. Do I have a mover and a seconder? Councillor Kirk-Bernard. Sorry.
In the minutes, if I'm on the right minutes, under item 13, decisions on proposed change 1 to the RPS, the motion was carried/lost. Yeah. So I assume that is a template that needs to be amended to be carried, because that was quite a momentous decision to carry our RPS through to its next stage. Get that correct. It's page 12 on Diligent.
Okay, we'll get that amended.
Happy to move.
And you're now seconding. So all those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. That passed. Thank you. Public minutes of the Representation Review Committee meeting on Thursday the 10th of October 2024. Most of you were there. Do I have a mover and a seconder? Councillor Staples, Councillor Nash. All those in favour, please say aye. Those opposed, none. Was that an aye, Councillor Lee? Okay, cool. Just checking. Paper passed. Paper 6, the adoption of the 2023-24 annual report. It takes up most of the paper in the forest. Morena Clint and Nossi. Sorry. Oh yeah. Do you all want to just stand up a little bit? You're looking like hobbits in the. just lift the chairs up a little bit. Yeah. Okay. In your hands, Sam.
Good morning. My name is Sam Ripley from the Corporate Planning and Reporting team, and I'll be introducing the annual report before handing off to Ashwin. So the purpose of this report is to advise Council of Greater Wellington's annual report for the year ended 30 June 2024, which is recommended for Council to adopt today. The draft annual report was considered by FRAC at their meeting on the 10th of October, and subject to any further changes required through the audit process, the committee recommended that Council adopt the report. The annual report, which is attachment 1 to the Council papers, reports against year 3 of our 2021 to 31 long-term plan, which is the 2023-24 annual plan, and specifically is reporting on our financial and non-financial performance as laid out in that plan. The contents of the report has been audited by Audit New Zealand. We'll speak to that in a moment. The annual report presents our performance story in 3 sections. So section 1 is an overview across financial and non-financial matters. Section 2 details specifically non-financial performance, including our progress against the LTP and our statement of service performance by our various activity groups, our LTP measures in other words. And section 3 details our financial performance. So once adopted by the council, the design copy will be finalized and made available on Greater Wellington's website, both as a PDF and hard copies will be printed and distributed to local libraries and council buildings, which will occur a few weeks after adoption. While we're working on the full designed report, we do have a small sample of what to expect. Circulate just a few printed copies for you to take a look at. Please note that these are to give an indication of the design, and for any reference to the content of the report, please refer to attachment 1. Attachment 2 to your papers is the summary of the annual report. This is a statutorily required document which summarizes the key financial and non-financial information as more for public accessibility. This is also audited. And once the annual report is adopted, the summary report will also be available on our website, as it will be converted to a digital subpage for more ease of access, a little bit more friendly, searchable content. A quick note, since the audit paper was prepared, we have several minor wording changes across the annual report following audit feedback, typos, things of that nature, but there have been no substantive changes which would impact your ability to adopt the report as presented in attachment 1. So before I hand things over, I would just like to acknowledge the rest of the corporate planning and reporting team, the finance team, the comms, and the design teams. Quite a few people involved. In particular, Tyler, Zafia, Ashwin, Rajesh, Audrey, Elisma, Daniel, Xanthi, Olivia, Steve, Owen, Ali, Monique, Shannon, and yeah, to name a few. I won't go any further with my Academy Award speech here, but just a thank you to all for work involved with the past few months preparing the annual report, summary report, and working with our colleague at audit. Hand over to Ashwin, unless there's any questions directly on that, for speaking to the financial matters.
Thank you, Sam, and good morning, councillors. So I'll take the financial aspects of the report, and similar to Sam, I would like to first off acknowledge my team, Audrey, Daniel, and Rajesh, in their preparation of the financials. They've done a really good job. Following the audit, I'm quite pleased to report that the numbers have not materially changed from what we presented to you in August. This year, we've done a full valuation of our flood protection and harbors infrastructure assets. We have also done a fair value assessment of our other infrastructure assets like water, parks, and Metlink. Although the value of these assets have not significantly gone up, it's still within our materiality threshold, and in consultation with audit, we have not adjusted the books. Finally, we have got 2 prior period items that are we have to note this time around, as explained in note 30 and note 35 of the annual report. The first one relates to the NZTA Wakakotai purchase of land for the Riverlink project, which you're quite familiar with. And the other one relates to the operating leases where Greater Wellington is a lessor. So we identified an error in the calculation of future rentals, which is due to a system change, but this has no impact on the numbers. And finally, I want to acknowledge our audit director, Clint Ramu, and his team in the finalization of the audit. We shared a great professional relationship despite our different differences. And I will hand over to Clint to talk about the audit.
Thank you, Ashwin. Kia ora. So just for benefit, my name's Clint Ramu, and Nosi Viwe Tsotso, who's the audit manager. So just to start with, acknowledge management and council, I think, in the level of engagement through the audit, again, very robust throughout the year. Access to management continues to be really easy and open, and we really welcome that. And we saw that play out a bit last week when we met with the chair and the CE. So thanks very much for that. I'm just going to ask Nosi just to take you through some of the audit process, and then I'll go through the few items.
Thank you, Clint. Good morning, councillors. Firstly, I just want to acknowledge the relationship that we have with the finance team and the corporate planning team. As much as you've mentioned, Ashwin, that we have some differences, but the professional relationship and making sure that the financial statements that will be presented today, that they are fair and a true reflection of the state of the council. So we really appreciate and the communication whenever we see any issues with, before we say there's an issue, we discuss with the management to make sure that we also from our side we've got a good understanding of what is happening. And and the audit process went very well from the planning stage up to the end of the audit, and Clint will detail some few of the things that will be included in an opinion, which was a result of a smooth transition in terms of the audit process from both sides. We really appreciate the relationship that we have with the council. And
Thanks, Nossi. So I'll just run through a few items around the audit opinion and then the representation letter, which will be in front of council. So in terms of the audit opinion, the key point I'm wanting to raise there that we've continued with the qualification in respect of the greenhouse gases. But having done that, I think we need to note that the amount of work that council has done in preparing the inventory, getting the information, and having a really good methodology, as well as the underlying systems and processes for calculating, especially the emissions in the public transport space, has been really remarkable. It's good work. I think it sets the foundation for next year and future years in how council reports on its greenhouse gases. The only reason why we were unable to land on reducing it to an emphasis of matter, which was what we started the year out with, and was because there was a gap in the year around some public transport information and bus data. So that gave us a completeness issue, but that was not because the systems weren't there. It was just that there was a gap where we couldn't get the assurance we would be looking for. But other than that, the main thing I think for 23-24, we're hoping we'll have a full set of data and then running that through our data analytics team, and we're looking to start that early, so that if there are any things, we can sort it out as soon as possible. So that's the first thing. The second item I just wanted to talk about was the Riverlink item and matter and the revaluation of those assets that happened last year. Management sought some professional accounting advice on it. We came back, the advice, and we deliberated and took it through our experts, and we concur with management's position on it, and how it should be accounted for. Ultimately, it has not changed the bottom line that was reported last year. It's just, instead of showing it as an outright sale, we showing it as a leasehold sale until the final agreement and the survey results have been concluded with New Zealand Transport Agency. So it's a small tweak, but it was about getting the accounting correct. Snapper revenue was the other item that we had concerns about last year, and how does council get assurance that the revenue is complete and accurate? Again, I think we worked well with management around that. We had access to Snapper. We went in through the internal audit team to review the IT systems and controls in place. We got our data analytics team involved as well to recalculate up to 100% effectively of all fee revenue that was earned using Snapper data, GPS data, and triangulating that to come out within, it didn't even make it onto our error schedule, the difference, when we're talking about millions of dollars. So it's a similar approach we're wanting to take with the greenhouse gases, but I think just the work that took place there was really useful and well supported by both Snapper, Transdev, and Council. The revaluations was the last thing, the flood protection revaluation. So that's seen a big uplift. Again, we put that through an expert review. Council had its own peer review. The valuation work was done internally to a really high quality. And I mentioned this at FRAC.
the methodologies used, the costing, the support for the assumptions, seem it was really good. And sometimes the numbers we get excited about, but I think it's about the quality of the data that council now has, and the approach it's taken, I think sets it up well for future planning processes. Chair, the last point was just to say that we have a letter of representation that we ask you and the chief executive to sign off on. And the only item that Ashwin's alluded to, there was a misstatement. We call it a soft error, but it's above our threshold, and we ask you just to sign off on that. And it's to do with the valuations and not booking. It's $16 million. It's not material for us, and we're happy for it to go unadjusted as long as council is happy with it and management. Thank you.
Okay, I've got Councillor Conley.
Thanks, Clint and Nossi. I'm having very old person thoughts in that I can't believe it's a year since you were here, doing this last year. Really struggling to get my head around that. I have three issues to get your opinion on, and I guess they're not strictly kind of dollars and cents, more strategic finance questions, so you may not be able to answer them. The first one is around our forecasting of CapEx spend. We made it a bit of a priority to improve our forecasting of CapEx, and I believe that we have seen results in terms of our actuals better reflecting what we forecast. I wondered if you wanted to comment on that, and whether you also believe that the initiatives we introduced had the right results in that space. I also wanted to ask about forecasting of PT revenue. Last year we had to make adjustments because our forecast income was not what we had initially outlined in our long-term plan. But I guess, and I know this is backwards looking rather than forwards looking, but are there any lessons that we need to take on board looking forward for forecasting into the future? And my final question is around asset management practice. And in the Te Awa Kairangi committee that I chair, we've specifically been looking at our treatment of flood assets. But we saw last year that we had a bit of a deterioration in the performance of our flood management assets, and we've tried to turn that around by investing a bit more money into our asset management in that space. But do you have any thoughts on our asset management practice, generally how we're going and whether we need to do things differently?
Thank you, Councillor. It's also a bit like deja vu for me. We'll never stop coming here. So I think some really good points. In terms of CapEx spend, I think you're starting to see the results of that. The spend is at the right level. Monitoring by this committee and the subcommittees is absolutely essential. I think, it ties in with the asset management practices as well, in my point around the flood protection revaluation. While it's an exercise in getting a number out, I think what was really quite good for us to see from that was the level of detail and knowledge within council around those assets, the condition, because we do look at condition as part of the valuation process, and some really good in-depth knowledge. And I think it's how council uses that with the forecasting and the planning when it approves the LTP or its annual plan or any flood management plan. How does those things come together? That it's not about the number coming and saying we want to spend 20 million. It's, well, are we spending it on the right thing? And I think those conversations are happening, and we see that. Last year, we talked about the business working with finance, and that's really important. You don't want to have the tail wagging the dog as well in terms of it just being finance focused, but how do you bring the business into the conversation and link your planning with the finances? And we've seen good elements of that. Around the forecasting of public transport revenue, you'd recall at the LTP stage, we raised this as a concern. It is a really, it's crystal ball gazing, I think sometimes. It's a challenging exercise. But the support and, again, the information that we we received from management when, with those forecasts. They're robust, it's well thought through, etc. But it doesn't stop council from challenging it as well, and again, again in a subcommittee, not in a forum like that have those conversations, do those assumptions, will it pass the smell test? And that's what we try and do, challenge and push back. But again, very knowledgeable people in this organization that are able to provide that support to us. So yeah, it is a difficult one. Any forecasting is a difficult number, but I think, as I said earlier, the foundations are in place at council from our observations to do the right thing.
Just ask a follow-up, which is just in terms of our asset management, and again, you may not be able to comment, but are you confident that, particularly with our flood assets, as they are some of the most critical assets we have, but not exclusively our flood assets, that we are provisioning enough funding in terms of replacing, renewal of those assets and keeping up with our asset management renewal and growth?
So, Chair, this is where I take the auditor's card and say, I wouldn't be in a position to say hand on heart. I think you're doing the right thing, whether it's enough funding, etc. That's a policy decision that I won't want to step into. Yep.
Anybody else? Any further questions? No? Okay. Thank you very much for presenting today. Do I have a mover and a seconder for this paper? Councillor Connolly and Councillor Duthie, do either of you wish to speak to the paper?
I guess last time we had the issue over the revaluation, which kind of put a bit of a dampener on receiving the annual report. This year, there's kind of nothing unexpected, and as I think I said in the FRAC subcommittee, everything in here has been well signalled from management, so there were no surprises. So this was just kind of tidying it up and presenting it to us, in a nice format. So thank you to all the team, and thank you to the auditors and everyone else that had a part in this.
No. Okay. All those in favour, please say aye. Those opposed? No. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, staff, and Clint and Nossi. Thanks for the work that you've put into this. Excellent. Right. You broke my wrist moving that page. Local water one done well. Updates and preferred model. Julie, are you taking us away? I don't know what it is about those chairs, but they always seem to go a bit low.
I'm legitimately short, so I need all the help I can get. Kia ora, councillors. Good to be here with you again this morning. Just by way of introduction, I've got the team here, Team Water, Local Water Done Well, a bit of a collaborative effort across GW, and particularly would like to introduce you to Verity Smith, who's joined us in Te Hunga Whiriwhiri and has been recently come on board to help us think about some of the Māori rights and interests in the water space. So kia ora, Verity. Welcome to Council. Just start with a few introductory remarks, but otherwise let the paper speak for itself. So the purpose of this report is really to seek decisions related to the Local Water Done Well work that's been progressing across the region since April this year. And driving our timeframes really is central government timeframes around needing to have submitted a water services delivery plan by 3rd of September next year. That's a hard deadline for us all. A number of you will recall we had a council workshop on the detail of the proposed model back in September, and so this report follows on from that workshop and sets out the preferred model that we are suggesting alongside other councils that would be a preferred model to take forward to consultation with the public early in 2025. This model is a joint asset owning water services council controlled organisation, so it goes further than the existing Wellington Water arrangements, which is delivering services but not asset owning doesn't do strategy, and to a certain degree they do, but it goes quite a bit further than that. The team who've been working on this believe that this is the most affordable, efficient, and capable solution to the in regards to the desired objectives for the region and for water infrastructure for the long term. The paper is seeking your agreement to continue with that regional process with other councils who are also choose to be part of it and develop that proposal for a joint water services entity. Currently, the Hutt City Council and Wellington City Councils have considered this and have agreed unanimously to continue with the regional process. We know that Carterton District Council yesterday decided to not proceed, so they have taken an off-ramp. There are multiple on-ramps and off-ramps through this process. Porirua City Council are considering their position on this today, but we're expecting them also to stay in for the regional model, and it's very likely, reading our crystal ball, we would expect that most the metros, not most, all of the metro Wellington councils would stay in, with it being less likely for Wairarapa and Horowhenua and Kapiti. However, their decisions are still to come. They will be happening later in November. This paper also seeks agreement for Greater Wellington to stay in as a shareholding council for an establishment period. The reason for that is to provide a bit of certainty in the process and give some confidence to other participating councils around our ability to coordinate and collaborate to actually get this entity off the ground. And also, I think it's important for us in terms of having the confidence in the new entity in terms of the reliable transfer of our assets and our responsibilities, and provide stability to that entity in its formative years before we exit. This also enables us to help shape the identity of that new entity, to really guide its formation through the establishment directors that will be put in place, but also the other guiding documentation and frameworks, I guess, in terms of things like the statement of expectations that would be developed by the shareholding council. So it gives us an opportunity to put our fingerprints on it, albeit from a slightly greater distance. Finally, there are a number of decisions sought in this paper. However, I would note that this is not the decision, the big one, that actually locks you into following through on this. And so there will be further off-ramps between now and middle of next year when you do have to take the decision, which will be the big one around what the future water service delivery model is for the Wellington region. In the meantime, we're asking for your agreement to continue with this regional process and prepare the next stages for public consultation in early 2025. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. A question from me. I think in the paper it indicated that South Wairarapa and Marston District Council moved to November decision because they were awaiting further reports. Are those internal to them, or what is it that they're waiting on that Carterton wasn't waiting on when they decided yesterday?
I thought you were having the answers, Councillor Connolly. So my understanding is that they were looking for more information around the economics, so comparing the cost options, and also because the one of the things that has been initiated is a peer review, an independent peer review of the economic modelling that's associated with in this report, and so we've just received that in the last 5 days or so. That was being undertaken by Castelia, so that was the other thing that they wanted time to consider, was looking at that. Whereas if they'd had to carry on with their timeframe for their decisions by the end of October, then they wouldn't have been able to have that reassurance. But particularly for their own modelling about their own status quo model or their own go it alone model, they wanted to make sure that they had the right information in terms of the costs.
So just to follow up, do all the Wairarapa councils need to be in their Wairarapa model to make that work? What happens if one of them doesn't?
Good question. I think some of them, it would be hard to meet the financial sustainability and scale objectives of the government's policy, I think, without them all being in together. I think that my understanding of conversations would be that it is likely that they would stay together. Some of them do have independent, can do standalone because that's their status quo, but I suspect that they will be looking for the opportunities to work together.
Okay. Councillor Connolly, then Councillor Duthie.
Thanks. As you were just talking about with the Wairarapa councils, there is an element of kind of a thought experiment in some of these decisions, in that quite a lot of how one council responds is contingent on how other councils respond, and that's shown by Wairarapa, but it's also a driver for us as well. And I guess I just have concerns about, and a little bit I'm playing devil's advocate here, but about the status quo model. So the instruction from government was that we were to, at a minimum, consult on two options. One was the status quo, and one was the regional model that they're kind of promulgating. But Wellington, so for us, Wellington Water is the status quo. It's the entity that we're currently part of. But the status quo is kind of odd in that if everyone else exits the status quo, then there is no status quo. And I do wonder whether, because the status quo is really a fictional thought experiment rather than something practical that could in fact ever eventuate, whether we should include a base model that is in-house delivering bulk water ourselves, just as a juxtaposition to the preferred model in terms of going out to consultation. Are we in fact really, I guess, not presenting the truth to constituents when we go out with two models, one of which is not really an option at all?
Interesting. I'm not sure what the question is there that I can usefully respond to, but I think one of the things that everyone who's participating in this regional process has agreed is that the status quo model is not really a real choice because it's fundamentally flawed, though DIA have clarified that they would expect it's the status quo with whatever tweaks would be needed in order for it to conform to the future legislative environment or the current legislative environment for those bills that are passed. So it would be Wellington Water model as the basis point plus the tweaks to make it conform to the new regulatory regime, which could be fairly considerable.
I guess my question was, the status quo is not a thing, because if the other councils pull out of the Wellington Water model and want to do something else, then we would be alone in the Wellington Water, and that would not be the Wellington Water. So should the base model be in-housing, in-house of our bulk water as a model to reference and consider another framework?
Okay. Thanks. Yep. I think I've got what you're getting at there. So we are required to do the status quo model. That's required by the government, so we have to include that. What it would be then, I think, is including a third option, which would be the comparison of a bulk water CCO on its own right as a standalone. So that would be a third option that we would have to consult on.
So can I just follow up on that question then? What does it mean to include a third option in terms of collective ability to actually bring that through the process now, and the cost of adding a third option into the consultation?
I think it would not be an insubstantive amount of work to shape up a bulk water CCO option and model. We are anticipating needing to, because of the tight timeframes, to be able to get through the consultation, factor that in, and then bring back decisions to council. We would be needing to have that work done by Christmas, probably in order to form consultation documents. The consultation will be a collaborative process with the other councils who have agreed to be part of the regional process, and we'd be at this stage trying to be doing that consultation late January, early February, basically as soon as possible. So while it's technically feasible, it would be quite a substantive amount of work, and I guess the question would be whether that is considered to be a reasonably practical option to offer bulk water on its own right in terms of the scale, the financial costs of actually doing that if you were to proceed with it, and whether that is a good approach to take.
I think that's a good set of questions and a fair answer from Julie. The other tangent I'd bring to it is, in answer to your original question, Councillor Connolly, is we are assuming that the metro councils will remain in. And if that is the case, the Wellington Water model, as it's currently structured with the tweaks that we're talking about, provision of bulk water to those metro entities, kind of remains in the same structure. Should one of them pull out, that might change the response to the question. But right at the moment, on the assumptions that we have, I think Julie's answer is a fair one, and it's really a question of the quantum of work to provide that third option to consult on, which would not be insignificant, as opposed to a consultation on a model that we feel generally comfortable could work on the basis the metro staying in.
If you just indulge me, Chair. So I don't believe a standalone CCO is a viable option because, as we've all talked about, economies of scale are key to resolving the crisis that we're in with water at the moment. However, it's more from the consultation perspective, and I guess I look to Francis here to maybe hear his thoughts. If we're going out to consultation, we genuinely need to offer people options. And is this a genuine option that we're going to be criticised for not laying on the table? And what we're laying on the table is something that is dead in the water, i.e. the current Wellington water model. So really we're going out to consult with one option that's viable and one non-thing. And will we be criticised for skewing the consultative process by not offering genuine options to the community?
So under the most recent, I think it was the second bill, may have been the first, forgive me, one of the bills that was released this year for water services has put in alternative consultation provisions for local government. So that does cover us to a certain degree in regards to needing to provide a suite of options. We can choose not to use those provisions, and we are not limited to only having to produce two, but we have been given that cover through that legislative process to only need to consult on one other, which is the preferred and the status quo, and nothing more. So that I guess the defence is that we are meeting the expectations set out under the local water done well policy framework in regards to consultation and options.
Okay. Further questions? Councillor Duthie.
Thank you. Your question, Councillor Connolly, took my mind in a different direction, but coming back to what I was going to ask, you talked about the modelling work that's been done on the regional asset owning CCO model that's proposed. How does the cost of bulk water provision compare in the modelling for that proposed regional CCO versus the cost of us providing it as a bulk water supply today? And my point of comparison is that one of the territorial authorities, a figure of 30% difference between of that economic efficiency that would come with a regional model versus the status quo or going alone or something like that. So how does our modelling cost compare? And will that be part of the consultation?
So definitely that would be part of the consultation, would be comparing the costs. At the moment, the costs have been done on the basis that all 10 councils are in. So it's quite difficult to sort of compare to like what it currently costs us. And in the future model, we would assume that those costs would carry forward, but they would be just held by this other entity. So it our costs would be our involvement through being the shareholding entity and engaging in that process. We would have a full transfer of our assets and our debt, and the revenue stream would also go with that. So it's not, we wouldn't be able to do it. I would say we'd actually be able to do it more efficiently from the overhead of actually managing the relationship between Wellington Water and ourselves, and the oversight that we need to provide in terms of the capital projects that we wouldn't need to be doing, that there will be efficiencies gained through some of that sort of management overhead. With the scale that you can get by having if we had all 10 councils in, which we know because we've already had one drop out, we're not going to get 10, but as many as possible means that we gain the greatest efficiencies. And so if we have the same sort of metros, TAs involved alongside us as we currently have within Wellington Water, then we'd probably expect it to be relatively similar. However, that because of their ability to manage across a greater portfolio of assets and funding, and the ability to access the new provisions under the local government funding authority, they should be able to run a much more efficient ship is the expectation, and certainly that's the objectives set out in the policy framework.
Not convinced.
The detailed costs and modelling are still to come as part of the next stages. Yeah, and that's why we're getting that independent reviewing of the financial modelling to make sure that the numbers are correct. A lot of this work was done under the previous government's water reform, so we have a lot of that to draw upon. But we've been going through a series of meetings with the economic consultants and economic modellers to make sure that the assumptions that they're using and the forecasts that are in our LTP and things like that are still reasonable assumptions to make in terms of what the cost would be going forward.
Yep.
So I guess what we won't know at the moment, and this comes back to Councillor Connolly's question, is what would be the equivalent cost of a standalone bulk water CCO that we were the sole shareholder of. And that comparison between the economies of scale of a regional model versus a standalone, which will be part of the TA's consultation, that there'll be quite clear numbers that if we went it alone it would cost us heaps more, and if we go together then we won't have that because we haven't done that. We're not currently planning to do that focus on a standalone. So our comparison will be between the Wellington water model and the cost of that continuing being a legal fiction versus the regional model, rather than the cost comparison between bulk water standalone CCO versus regional CCO. Correct?
Some councils are choosing to do an investigation on what a standalone option might be. So Carterton District Council did that as part of their suite of options. Other councils, other TAs have chosen not to and are choosing to take the route that we are, which is all the eggs are in the regional basket, and not investing effort in standalone options because they just simply don't believe that that's viable. And from that economies of scale argument, I think it was in the Hutt City Council discussion the other day, they talked about we haven't done it on our own for 20 years, so why would we start now? Because that would be like quite a strange swing to be making at this point in time. So other councils, not all councils, will be getting the exact comparison figures for a standalone CCO unless that they were looking at that as a serious option, or some of the councils in our process already do provide standalone, such as Carterton. So it's easier for them to do so.
Thank you, that's good clarification. Thank you.
Councillor Staples.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is around the emails that have been coming through just recently around a charter and where that fits into this, because it's not really part of the paper. And on the back of the presentation that we had in public participation, although it was around water meters in the front end, one of the comments made by the speaker about keeping the entity in control of elected people says to me that it's actually more about corporatisation and not having elected people answerable for how water is run, which arguably is why we're in the problems we are now, because elected people are always told to keep the rates down. So I'm not really quite sure what my question is, but it's around, well, one, the charter, which is the purpose behind that to try and give people that are concerned about us going into a CCO model some form of security, and will it? Yes, I'm not sure if you can answer that, Julie.
Yes, I can, to a degree, Councillor Staples. For the benefit of everybody's context, in the Hutt City Council and Wellington City Council meetings this week, there was an additional recommendation added to the papers regarding that the advisory oversight group, which Councillor Connolly is our member on, consider the introduction or the development of a consumer charter to look at some of the consumer protections for water users. Things like, is there going to be a minimum amount of water that residential consumers can be expected to be allowed to access before they get charged, things like that. So that's where that's come from. So that's what Councillor Staples is referring to. And certainly that can be considered as part of the next stage of the development of this regional process. The thing I would caution is that Bill 3 that is due to be introduced in December for this water reform package will be looking at the consumer protection and regulatory framework, and that is where a lot of the consumer protection measures will be put in place, and the detail will come around that. We have high-level understanding of what some of that is. I'm happy to talk a little bit about that to the extent that we know from DIA what that might look like. So that will cover things like consumer safeguards. It will take a very economic, because they are going to be the economic regulator, will take a very economic lens to things. But it is around ensuring that that there are safeguards in place. The other opportunity for councils to influence, which is also part of the concern, is how do we ensure that the new entity is set up on the right footing and takes the right sorts of things into account. Yes, we will have less hands-on ability to shape that, but we do still have avenues. So the appointment of directors will be an important one for shareholding councils, the establishment of the statement of expectations and what that sets out. And also the government framework also introduces the requirement on the new entity to have a particular water strategy, and they will be being quite specific about what that water strategy has to entail, and that detail is still to emerge. So we will need to be taking that into account at the end of this year into next year as we further develop this regional plan, and what additional measures might be needed, or what additional settings can we put in place to help it set off on the right foot and meet the expectations of our region.
Right, question from me. So, yeah, I'm on the list. I'm actually on the list. So, a question, Julie, about exiting the arrangement. So, paragraph recommendation 23 talks about us remaining as a shareholder for the establishment period, with the option to exit at a later date, which we've generally had as a view for quite some time. Never really got to the point of, well, when is that exit date, because that hasn't really arisen. The opportunity to actually focus on that hasn't arisen. My question is, well, from the date that the new entity is established and we are therefore a part of, what do you think that transition? When should we be looking to exit? Is that 2 years, 3 years, 5 years? What's the trigger, if you like, for doing that?
I think that's a good question. My first starting point would be things always take longer than you expect, and certainly establishing a new entity is no small thing to do. If it is relatively similar to our current shareholding councils of Wellington Water, I think that it probably is more straightforward than if it's going to a much more expanded, 8, 9, 10 councils, not 10 anymore. I think probably in the 2 to 3 year mark is at least, but it may take up to 5 years. I think we'd want to retain some flexibility so that we can read the room as things develop, because there may be undoubtedly things that crop up that give Greater Wellington cause for either concern or more assurance. We may actually feel much more comfortable at letting go of our responsibilities if things are set up well, and the consumer protections and the regulatory framework all gives us adequate assurance that actually things are going well. I don't think it should need to be more than 5 years, but I think in that window of 3 to 5 years seems appropriate based on what we know at the moment.
Okay, can I just signal at this stage to the council that I had prepared 2 recommendations, a change to recommendation 23 and a new recommendation 24. Having just heard what Julie said, I think my only change would be to recommendation 23 to change the word "with the option" to "with the intention to exit at a later date." I'm really trying to find a way by which we tell our partners or advise our partners that we're only here for the transition period and we're only here to make sure the organisation is settled. properly and gets underway properly. We're not here for anything more than that. I think we just need to be a little bit more emphatic in signalling that we're gone after a particular period of time. Hang on, Councillor Connolly, and then Councillor Kirkman.
Sorry, changing the subject back. So, with the consultation, you talked about the fact that our timeline would line up with the other Metro TAs. Are we going to go as far as kind of having a joint consultation thing, or if not joint, kind of part of the same family? Because where I'm thinking is I've been on a journey this morning. I've come around to the fact that actually, if we were all going out with two options, being Wellington Water, status quo, and a regional entity, that makes a lot more sense than if they're all going out with various other combinations and permutations and we're only going out with these two options. But if there's consistency from the Metro councils that we can keep doing what we're doing and this is the other option, we can all do this new thing, then it sits much more comfortably with me that those are the only two options that are being presented. So I guess I want an assurance that our consultations, as far as practicable, will be kind of joined up, and everyone who looks at them will see you can't really look at one TA or one council in isolation. You actually have to look at the family of councils to see where the future lies.
Completely agree, and that is something that we've been pushing for through the process, and we're just embarking with the with other officers in the TAs group to start working out how do we actually coordinate that. I think it is absolutely imperative that we coordinate our consultation, because otherwise, particularly in the case of Greater Wellington, we'll be doubling up on those that we're consulting, and that is not an efficient use of anybody's time. My understanding, based on the conversations I've had with other councils, is that we are all only going out on those two. There may be one exception, and that is being discussed at the moment, but certainly the indications we've had have been that we will all be consulting on the same thing so that it is able to be compared.
Councillor Kirkman, then Councillor Duthie.
Thank you. My comments really came back to following up on the Chair's comments about item 23, or the item 23, changing the wording from adoption, from option to exit at a later date to intention to exit at a later date, is a very, very significant change, and we would be precluding future trienniums from making the decision. We're making a decision today for a group of councillors that may be quite different to those around the table here now, who may have a different view. And so I think that if we're going to talk about that, that's a very serious issue, and we should be considering it very deeply, the reasons behind it and that, because I think that's a significant change. Thank you.
Councillor Duthie.
Thank you, Councillor Staples, for raising the question about what's this charter business that's been talked about at other councils, and how does that relate to statement of expectations, us guiding the establishment. Assuming a charter, since it's been resolved by two territorial authorities, assuming some work is done to try and come up with something that councils can agree to, and I assume it would need to be unanimous agreement of shareholding councils to put something like, to give something like that legs, what could be our contribution to that? What sort of kaupapa or public good expectations that we have for the good future management of bulk water and the rest of the three water system could be usefully included in that charter or statement of expectations, or whatever form it ends up. From a territorial authority point of view, it's very much about residents and consumers and ratepayers and them getting a fair deal and so on. From our point of view, it's perhaps more about the network and the system, and its treatment of the environment, it's how it goes about producing infrastructure and so on. What could be our contribution to that, so it's not just a territorial focused consumer charter perhaps, but a bit broader with our public good imperatives?
So I think you have outlined a number of those. So it's the environmental elements to it, and thinking about Te Mana o Te Wai and the the health of water, and thinking also about the links to our environmental regulatory environment. I think also the contribution we could make is encouraging that regional view and not just a "this is my patch" view. And that is something that we bring to that conversation now through the development process as well, is around thinking about that, but also taking a long-term view and thinking about climate change, resilience, sustainability, and pushing those elements as well, so that we're thinking about not just the here and now, but actually what do future generations need, what do the future of the region need in terms of growth and resilience and that kind of thing.
And thank you. Good point to flag that I've also got some amendments to the recommendations that have been circulated earlier that we'll get to in debate.
Councillor Nash.
That relate to that question and response. Thank you, Judy.
Thanks, Chair. Morning, everybody. Thanks, Julie. Just a question for you, Councillor Ponta, along the lines of Councillor Kirk-Bernan's point. Could you just explain why you think it's important right now to change recommendation 23 from having the option to exit to having the intention to exit? Because I feel like I don't quite see the value to us right now of narrowing down our options slightly. We've said, you've said in letters, and I think we've said as a council that we would exit if we had total confidence that the new entity was, you know, working well and delivering value and very solid. And, you know, I think that's sort of broadly agreed. But I think we're a long way from that to be able to signal that, you know, we're ready to go. So if you could explain.
Well, in a fair point. I think I'm trying to give greater clarity to our partners in this, that we're here for a short time, not for a long time. And I think that that's important to make that statement now, because parties shouldn't enter with a false understanding that we are actually binding ourselves to this relationship for eternity. If that's the view of the council, I've always approached this on the basis of here is an opportunity to separate our regulatory function from our delivery function, and so I've got quite a black and white view on that, but you may not.
I guess I feel like it doesn't feel as black and white in my mind. I don't know what others feel, but I think I broadly support that direction of travel, but I'm just wary of what's coming and the uncertainty. I mean, we had an entire set of reforms that just got completely axed from one day to another. And you know,
I'm happy to leave it as it is, as on reflection. Just trying to turn the dial a bit.
My concern is that it actually adds further instability rather than creating certainty. And we've had some talk in the AOG around the fact that there might be a period of time where new councils are unable to join the entity because of the instability that would cause. And so I also don't want us to cause instability by kind of signalling that we're fair weather friends. So I guess I err on the side of there's no reason for us to signal that now. We did write it in our letter to Kerry Prendergast when we were first involved, so we have signalled it. But why now? I think we should be trying to get this set up as well as possible and be part of it.
Okay, fair enough. Wow, Chairman changes his mind. Chris?
Thank you. Yes, look, I feel the same way about this. I'm not against us at a later stage deciding that we may want to opt out. I've got no problem there. But I think the reasoning's got to be sound. I think when we talk about separating the regulatory side of it from the actual activity, we've got to be careful, because with all the environmental regulation we do, the next thing will be saying that we shouldn't own parks and we shouldn't own all the environmental land because we're a regulatory body in that. And so that we've got to be very careful with that modelling of how we explain and discuss those things like that. I actually think there's a benefit in the regulatory and also being involved in it. So you've got the vertical integration. I think there's a real benefit in that sort of thing. And also from a regulatory point of view, There's changes going on at the moment in the electrical industry and the
You got a
motor
quick
industry self-regulate.
question?
And so
We're not in debate yet.
We're not in debate. It's been a long go, but we're not in debate.
okay.
So I've removed my changes, but Quentin, you've got some additional recommendations which Francis and Elizabeth are going to throw on the screen.
So I can speak to those.
And do you just want to speak to those, and we might just workshop those for a few minutes, because there might be some improvements that we can make to what's on the screen.
And I think there can be, especially following Julie's comments earlier in response to my question. Not least that the numbering will be wrong because you've just removed your.
Sorry.
I'm sure that can be resolved. So just quickly to summarise my reasons for putting these forwards in discussion with Councillor Connolly and the Chair before this meeting. So I think the direction of travel here is right, and when we indicated through the letter, and it's included in that report attached to our paper, that our hope is to exit and to focus on that regulatory role. Darren on our behalf sort of fashioned it in terms of, if we're confident that the new model is dressed for success, is going to deliver good services for the region. And so my intention here is to I guess piggyback on the territorial authorities' idea of a consumer charter, sort of a public good aspect of statement of intent, a little bit more publicly digestible, a bit more social license building, and to think about what principles would we, as the environmental regulator, as the bulk water supplier, from our experience, bring to that, because it's not so much about consumer rights, that's much more a territorial authority aspect. I mean, it can be, but it will be some of those other things. And so I've suggested a couple of one in terms of Te Mana o Te Wai, environmental protections, which is what underpins our regional policy statement, natural resources plan, and so on. Also suggested one around the way the entity may employ and procure, and I think to our procurement processes for the Linrim trains, for example, where we've talked about ethical procurement aspects to that. We've debated and discussed living wage commitments and so on. But actually, in answer to my question earlier, Julie also posed even broader or other aspects. So it might be that these recommendations are too specific and could actually be a more general principle that then lets Councillor Connolly on the AOG and our staff go away and work out what our contribution to that sort of statement of principles for the future could be. That would then give us confidence that this new entity would be dressed to success to succeed us in supplying bulk water to the region, and would be supportive of our regulatory role, which would be our primary function in the future. So
okay,
that's where I was coming from, but the wording, I think, definitely can be improved.
So reflecting on that, Julie, and your answer to Councillor Duthie's earlier question.
So my recommendation would be that, given that a couple of councils will be bringing this back into the advisory oversight group because they've already agreed that they want to explore that, and given that we still have further consultation to do, and we've got Bill 3 to come as well, I think we could include a high-level statement without trying to get too detailed at this stage, because we need to reflect a whole range of interests and have a good discussion. What you could talk about is that in the next stages of the work, that the advisory oversight group is invited to explore the need for that, so they can take into account what's coming in that customer protection and regulatory framework, and make specific reference to not only protecting and communicating the consumer rights, because that absolutely will be an important part of this landing well, because it will be a big change for consumers. But also can include reference to safeguarding the environment, for example, but without having to box ourselves too closely in when we don't have the detail of what will already be adequately covered through the regulatory framework that's still to come in the next bill. Would be my advice.
Okay, so do you have a recommendation that picks that up?
Yes.
Oh, something was baked earlier over here.
Yes. There was something that's baked earlier, and I would change one word, which would be after the advisory oversight group investigate. Perhaps the word explore is more appropriate.
I don't think I've ever seen as long a recommendation as that, Julie.
I know it's
Well, it
hideous,
matches
isn't it?
the
But I was doing
23 recommendations, which may be a record.
It is a bit lengthy. It was done under while it was magically written while I was sitting here talking to you. I'm sure there are probably words to cut out.
Do we want to add in the idea around living wage and ethical procurement? I'm looking for a kind of cover-all, but I do think, Quentin, I do think we have quite some expertise, particularly, well, in both, and
we stood behind those things ourselves. Yeah.
I think that some of those elements will be covered through the consumer protections and regulations. Having a quick look through what DI are expecting to cover, it's quite substantive, particularly in those sorts of elements around the expectations of the way that entities will need to procure, the sophistication that they need to have. So my suggestion would be leave it open and explore with how much to what degree that sort of thing is needed to fill any gaps once we've seen the detail of that regulatory framework in the next couple of months.
Yeah, I think it's been an excellent debate, and it does reflect many of the principles of this council that should go into the broader debate. But I think, again, I'd agree with Julie's, or the general tone, that a broader, more catch-all recommendation is probably more useful. Doesn't negate any of the issues that have been raised in your proposed amendment, Councillor Duthie at all, but it does give it a bit more space to explore it in a slightly different way as we go through the process, remembering this is not the final decision for this organisation, in fact, the process at all.
Okay. What's the feeling about that?
I think it would be good to maybe split it up into two. It's too long, I think. So you could stop after consumer charter and then have another recommendation which agrees that the charter should yada yada yada. That's at least easier to read, and I personally I think it would be good to highlight the procurement stuff. I don't think that closes down anything, because if you're saying it's going to happen anyway, then why not flag it? So you could stick that in the second recommendation.
So what is that?
I guess I'd say agrees that the charter should protect and communicate the rights of local water users, safeguard the environment, and consider living wage and ethical procurement. I'm not so. I mean, I think the legislative bit. I mean, it has to do that anyway, because we can't really act inconsistently with legislation. So I think that may be superfluous from my point of view, but I don't know. Yeah. Okay.
Through you, Chair. So some of these matters may be more appropriate for the statement of expectations. So we might not want to tie it too tightly to the charter, especially if the charter doesn't go anywhere, whereas the statement of expectations is a done thing. What it contains is up to the shareholding councils, however, and that may be a more appropriate thing than a consumer charter, because it's more about how the organisation performs its commercial operations, essentially. So that would be my suggestion.
So I suggest that then agrees that a charter, because there isn't one at the moment, but there might be, or similar mechanism or similar. It doesn't actually have to be called a charter to achieve this end. So agrees that a charter or similar means, something like that.
Okay. Just in terms of the reason I think ethical procurement and living wage is reasonable here in a consumer charter point of view is because one of the purposes of the consumer charter is to link consumers as individuals to the way that the entity works. And I guess this is a key way that it's going to be working, right? How it gets its stuff, how it procures, how it employs people. Once it's happening, once it's up and running, there'll be less of a link. So you want to bake those things in early. Okay, Councillor Saul?
Yeah. I guess what's been clearly signalled from central government has been that as the I guess value for money and the economic efficiency of whatever the model will be. And just to pick up on Councillor Nash's point that as a consumer, that sometimes those factors can dilute the ethical procurement and the living wage elements of it, as well as a lot of the environmental work we've done. So my question is, we also have recommendation number 8, where we note that New Zealand's water management regime has consistently undermined Māori rights and interests in water. We've also done a tremendous amount of work over the last few years to implement Te Mana o Te Wai, and my question is there any point in these recommendations where we want to refer to the amount of work and the commitment that we've had from more or less the same players who are involved in the AOG, that work has already been done, albeit we're about to be in a new legislative space, but nevertheless those intentions and that work has been done. Just wondering if that needs to be highlighted or expressed in these sets of recommendations, or do we just want to stay quiet on that? Because I don't think it's an exclusively iwi Māori thing as well, right? Because we've had the TAs involved, we've had the community involved. Greater Wellington has driven a tremendous amount of that work.
So how would you add that to recommendation 9, Councillor Saul?
I was wondering if it was an additional one, or whether there was an appetite to signal that all that work has been done, that those agreements have been made, and in some form we want to retain those principles.
Verity?
Kia ora, Councillor Saul through the chair. The inclusion of that recommendation was really just to keep it, highlight the need to ensure that Māori participation at the governance management level is actively considered through the process. So may I ask just what you're proposing there? Is it acknowledging the work that's been done to date?
I think it is about acknowledging all that work that has been done by essentially the same players who are involved in this new entity, and for some commitment of seeing those principles and those aspirations to continue in the formation of the new entity, in that statement of intent, rather than sort of rewriting and renegotiating everything. So much of the work has already been done. A lot of time and money has been invested in it. So just to reflect that as a principle, because I think even Councillor Connolly has expressed the difficulty that she's had in the current entity of having having the leadership and the decisions flow into upholding those principles and that work that we've done.
I just sound a note of caution perhaps around this. I think the recommendation 8 is an excellent one to have in there, and I understand the reason for your question. The only thing I think we do need to be aware of with both our RPS plan change and our plan change 1, some of the work that we have done to date as a council, and you have led as councillors, it is actually going through a kind of statutory process, and some of those issues will be debated through that statutory process. So there's just a slight thing we need to manage in terms of what you are discussing and looking to prove here by the nature of the recommendations, and the statutory process we're going through with other bits of the business, which will be contested. So there's just there's a slight degree of tension we just need to be aware of.
Yeah, I'm just throwing it out there to sort of understand the appetite or where that sits in, or is this like, are we missing the boat by not signalling it?
I have a proposal. So for recommendation 9, we could note that council, now again, this does link Te Mana o Te Wai specifically to Māori interests, and I recognise that we may not want to do that, and I've tried to make Te Mana o Te Wai something that we all buy into. But noting Councillor Saul's point, if we said notes that council will continue to strengthen the level of involvement of mana whenua, implement Te Mana o Te Wai, and just add it in there, or resolve our commitment to Te Mana o Te Wai at all levels of the design process.
Kia ora. And resolve our commitment of Te Mana o Te Wai.
Verity, did you want to comment on
Kia ora,
that as
through
well?
the chair, it might help just to clarify the intention behind keeping that recommendation broad, so as not to constrain it specifically to Te Mana o Te Wai, but to actually, as I say, the participation in governance and management, the Te Mana o Te Wai issue, and also preserving the ability for future economic benefit, which are the three kind of key elements. Whilst we can't speak for mana whenua positioning, as we haven't had the outcome of the parallel process that's being run by the Ngāti Toa chair, we are conscious that those are key issues that have been found to have weight by the tribunal.
I think then maybe it's better as a separate one. Maybe just put it somewhere else, and say notes council's commitment to Te Mana o Te Wai and the relevance of Te Mana o Te Wai to the delivery of water services. Full stop. You know, that's just fact and pretty straightforward. Yeah, well, I mean, I guess it could go there. I mean, it could sort of probably, yeah.
If I may comment on that, it also relates to paragraph 12 in the paper, which reads, in addition, Greater Wellington's Whaitoa program has articulated the expectations of mana whenua and local communities regarding the state of water in the area. And it's sort of it's a note that reflects that that description paragraph. At the moment, the work of the Whaitoa committees across the region isn't referenced in the.
Darren, I was thinking council's commitment to Te Mana o Te Wai and its relevance to the delivery of water services.
Twenty past. Ken, David. on. Welcome back. We've just had our mover and our seconder in Councillor Connolly and Councillor Duthie. And we will throw the recs up onto the screen, just focusing in on the ones that have been amended. So this is new recommendation 10 and amended recommendation 9, I think it is. And then further down, a new recommendation 25 and 25 and 26. Recommendation 24 is just renumbered because of recommendation 10. So just all you need to do is focus on recommendation 25 and 26 as being different from what's in your paper. So, Councillor Connolly, do you wish to talk to the paper?
Yes, I would just also start by reminding people that we've put in those extra clauses around what we'd like the Charter to continue to contain, but obviously the Charter is going to be a collective piece of work, and so I will definitely ensure that those issues get raised and put on the table for consideration, but I make no guarantees as to what the final Charter is going to look like, but we'll keep everyone informed on how we go.
Okay.
In terms of this, it's no surprise to anyone that I think water in Wellington is in crisis. Every aspect of our water services are dangerously at risk of failure. 7 out of 8 of our water treatment plants are non-compliant. We have wastewater leaks into our freshwater all over the show, hundreds of them. The map of where those overflows are is so depressingly full of landmarks that you can't even narrow down to some sites of significance. Every summer we are dangerously close to running out of water. 1 in 10, a 1 in 10 chance that every summer we will run out of water, and our network is on the verge of collapse. There are so many leaks that we're spending a lot of money fixing the leaks instead of renewing the pipes and actually fixing the problem. So it's no surprise that I think that something new needs to be done, and this is the model that we have on the table. So I believe that the bigger the regional model that we can pursue, the better. We have estimated $17 billion of investment that we need to make over the next 25 years, and there's no way any individual council can leverage that kind of bill on its own. And for Greater Wellington as the bulk water provider, we need to look at increased storage. And we know the issues around 40% of the water is being lost in leaks. We know that we could do more on the demand side, but the modelling tells us that even if we get the demand side under control, we are going to need to look at water storage in the future, and that's just beyond our fiscal means at the moment. So this new water entity will allow the councils to borrow twice what individual councils can borrow on their own, and that will allow us to make some fiscally sensible decisions for the benefit of our water services. It will not be easy. This is going to cost consumers and residents a lot of money, but that's because we've allowed ourselves to get in this situation over generations of underinvestment, and we now have a system that is absolutely crumbling. And if we don't take control of it now, it may be too late, too expensive to just get on top of it. So this is the only way out, and I'm really happy that we're going to consult on the regional model, and I'm even more happy hearing about the prospect of us consulting with our TA colleagues around a regional model versus kind of the current Wellington water model with some tweaks. Hopefully the residents of Wellington will get behind this model and get behind our consultation. Thanks.
Thank you, and thank you to colleagues for consideration of these additional points. I think I'll just add 2 things. One is to recognise the work of those involved in our whaitua processes, both staff, councillors, territorial authorities, mana whenua, of course, and representatives of the community. They've laid the groundwork for our regulation of the environment, which becomes so important when if in future that becomes our primary role around bulk water as regulator and the rest of the 3 water system. So recognising that, and then also realising that one piece of that puzzle is yet to be fulfilled within our bulk water catchments, and that's the Natural Resources Plan elements relating to water quantity and allocation, which is so key for us to be a regulator of the bulk water supply system after we have left being the supplier of that water. So I guess I just want to flag that I think that's a priority, and that in the process of this establishment we need to set those regulatory rules for water quantity and allocation in both the Whaitua Te Whanganui Atara, which is the catchment from which our bulk water is sourced. But having said that, I am very comfortable with the whole set of recommendations.
Excellent, thank you. Any other councillors? If not, all those in favour, please say aye. Those opposed, no. Just look for Ken and David. Okay, paper passed. Thank you very much. Congratulations, everyone. Bit of a milestone, but as Julie says, not the final paper. Right, 8, triennial, a final representation proposal for the 2025 triennial local elections. You've all seen this, we've deliberated on it previously. Do I have a mover and a seconder in Councillor Staples and Councillor Saw? Either of you wish to speak to the paper? No? No? Anybody else? No? Okay, all those in favour, please say aye. Those opposed? Paper passed, thank you. National Land Transport Fund Plan funding implications. Tim.
Kia ora koutou, councillors, and through you, the chair. Just a small bit of context before I take the papers as read. This paper is to address a $134.5 million shortfall in the capital program. As you'll be aware, there were no significant investment programs funded out of the National Land Transport Fund that weren't already committed to, and this has led to a significant shortfall in our future investment budget. There's been a rapid review of offices of more than 30 projects and programs in the transport space, and a big thank you to the Metlink officers for all their support over the last 2 months. We've received quite a bit of feedback in terms of prioritisation, and the key themes coming through this paper would be the need to maintain momentum with the accessibility of our network. We are looking to downscale some of our key strategic projects, but we still intend to continue our journey to control and invest key public transport infrastructure, and this includes bus depots. I think we've decided that health and safety on our network is non-negotiable, and it's something we've highlighted with council. And you've also directed us to work on and scale back approaches to key transport infrastructure and connections, including Waterloo, the Lambton interchange, and a variety of other railway stations. You'll also note in this paper we're also intending to continue our partnership with Wellington City Council, and that's to look to develop rapid transit bus corridors through low-cost solutions, which will hopefully deliver faster and quicker journeys for our customers across the city. So once again, big thank you to the team for doing this last-minute rebudgeting process. No changes since the report was tabled. Happy to take any questions.
Councillor Gaylor and then Councillor Duthie.
Can I just, because I wasn't able to be at that workshop, can I please just have clarification around the Paraparumu railway station, the completion of that? Because I didn't quite clearly understand.
Through you, the chair, the result was the budget was maintained holistically.
Councillor Duthie.
Thank you. A question in relation to paragraph 90, which notes that the government is putting pressure on us to increase third-party revenue for public transport at the same time as having declined funding for investments that enable third-party revenue. There's also a specific mention there that the ticketing solution for Park and Ride is one of those affected as non-funded. Does that mean that our demand management of Park and Ride program is not funded and is being deferred, or is that a specific mention of an aspect of Park and Ride that's not being funded? Can you just clarify how that's affected, please?
Yeah, thank you, and through the chair. Good question. So we had envisaged a more holistic approach to charging for Park and Ride. We are still investigating low-cost app-based solutions as a workaround, but what we do understand at this stage is we probably won't be able to afford significant infrastructure, potentially gating and other sorts of infrastructure at the Park and Ride facilities. So at this stage, we have left a small amount of money, a few $100,000, to explore low-cost app-based options. The speed at which we progress will likely be quite slow and will be based on a trial, and the outcomes of those trials will be presented to Council.
And a follow-up question, for investments like that have been unfunded and therefore we're having to adjust and do less or defer so on, not just that but other ones, do we get the opportunity to re-put these projects to Waka Kotahi NZTA in is that in 3 years' time in the next round of NLTF funding? Is that, if something's deferred or not funded at the moment and we've therefore deferred it, it doesn't mean it's never funded, it just means it's not funded in this funding round, but we may put up a case for future funding. Is that correct?
Correct. And through you, the chair, there's classifications coming out of the National Land Transport Fund, which is run every 3 years. The project can be considered as approved, which means you've got the money, or it can be probable, which is you're likely to get the money predicated usually on a business case. There's possible, which basically means if there's leftover money, they will consider it. So it's basically after all the other projects have got underway, if there's something left over. And then there's not approved, which is it's essentially outside of the system. I think the vast majority, if not all of these ones, were not approved, so they're outside of the system. They can be reapplied for, obviously, in 3 years' time as part of the triennium. And one of the aspects of the funding that we have remained is to develop business cases to improve, essentially, the chances of those projects receiving funding in the next triennium as well. So we have a very strong case for why these projects add value. So you'll see that as an element in a number of these projects listed.
Okay. Are they Councillor Saw and Councillor Conway?
It's paragraph, well, you know that paragraph that has the 16, it's 16Y. You say that Riverlink wasn't funded, NZTA claim for previous land purchase for new station site. What does that mean? And what's the implication for us?
Through you, the chair, those actual A through to Z were actually in order of value. So we're sort of heading towards, I'd say, the rats and the mice towards the bottom there. Full credit to the team. There were some purchases made through Riverlink. We thought we'd use the site potentially for transport purposes. So we asked Wakatahi for potentially to pay 51% of that site purchase, which had already been made, and they said no. So I think the purchase decision had already been made through the Riverlink project. It was us just trying to reclaim money through the National Land Transport Fund.
So that doesn't mean that anything to do with the new station isn't happening. It's just we were trying to get some more money.
We're trying to clip them. Yeah.
Correct. The purchase had already been made, so we're essentially trying to get them to chip in.
Councillor Saw.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you to you and your team for keeping us abreast of the impacts of the NLTF decisions. I know it's been a tremendous amount of work and a bit of a blow for the plans that we have, but nevertheless, I think we have something that is workable, so I just want to acknowledge that. My question is on page 442 of Diligent, and it was around paragraphs 85 and 86. And much like the previous item around Whaitoa and stuff, my question is whether our recommendations sufficiently capture and reflect what the impact is on our public transport network for the sort of medium term. Like, we've identified that there's a 3-year impact, negative impact on public transport, but I'm wondering, given the strong wording in those 2 paragraphs, whether that is sufficiently reflected in our recommendations. and I'm waiting for Nigel to exercise caution on me. Probably.
Different debate, so I'm not going to necessarily exercise caution here, Councillor.
Yeah.
Through you, the chair. Look, I think I wouldn't say the public transport system is necessarily creaking at the seams or falling apart at the moment. I think what we're trying to say there is it's going to start looking quite old at some point, and we need to start renewing the assets that we've got in a holistic way. And there's some very clear examples, particularly on the rail network at the moment. So it's kind of the question is if not now and when, and there has to be that holistic approach to funding and that long-term planning of asset investment and infrastructure put in place. So I think we're not in the same place as perhaps other industries and infrastructure providers are at the moment, but I think things will start looking increasingly tight if we don't stay on top of this sooner rather than later.
Okay. Question from me. Going to the table in attachment 1 and recognising some of the text earlier on in the paper. First question is, what is the NZTA driver fund? How real is it, and how real is our ability to get money for that and from that fund, and what's actually included in the $1 million for the driver facilities?
Through you, the chair, that was very much provision mostly for driver toilets in the future. Some of those budgets can be incorporated into existing bus facility infrastructure budgets. And the driver fund essentially is a separate fund that was created by NZTA, and currently we're making an application today, I suspect, for the 75% fire rate of driver toilets. There's one in Johnsonville and one potentially in Paraparaumu, but at this stage we've just confirmed Johnsonville. It's not a huge amount of money. We're talking probably $100,000 to $200,000 most. And that's a small fund that's been raised by government in response to the current issues on the network and some of the existing condition issues for drivers.
So, supplementary question, what will the removal of the $1 million actually mean in terms of toilet facilities that we might have had planned otherwise?
Through you, Chair, I think we had a provision of 5 to 6 toilet facilities. However, we only had one confirmed location that we needed. This was potentially for the extension and rollout of additional facilities across the city. I'm not sure if Hamish is here and wants to talk about toilets. Yeah. Hamish can tell you what the difference might be.
Thanks, Tim.
Toilet, favourite subject.
Yeah. Through you, Chair. Tim's bang on there. So we put a provision in the LTP for additional toilets that were still in planning. So, as I said, the one in Johnsonville was the imminent one that we did have to do, which we're trying to claim through the fund at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Duthie?
Yes, thank you. On that same attachment 1, question of clarification around about the 7th item, new bus stop facilities. So I understand that quite a lot of that will be to do with the Wellington City big changes, but does that also include general bus stop improvements and shelters, and we therefore have a $2.1 million reduction in our ability to supply new shelters to residents who need to shelter from the rain to catch the bus over this 3-year period? Is that correct? Through you, Chair. Yeah, that's right. That fund through the low cost, low risk that we generally get is for new facilities new bus stop facilities on the network. So a reduction in that does mean that we can do less new shelters. So our portfolio doesn't grow quite as quickly, and the residents don't get as good of facilities.
Okay, Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks, Tim, for. I know it's a hard job trying to find that 134 million, and well done for reprioritising what was a lot of very nice to have or good to have projects. It is a fiscally responsible approach, but you did say that the depots are still in, and would it be safe to say that the depots are more than just a strategic asset control, but it is also has impact on contracts and our level of service?
Through you, the chair, correct. Look, the depot strategy is quite an interesting one because it does create quite a lot of value for this council, particularly in terms of investing in assets that will enable competitive tendering environments and assets which we can potentially invest in at a lower cost of borrowing than private operators who will try and reclaim those funds. So from a strategic perspective, it does provide us that certainty of investment over the long term in our assets, and it also provides us a degree of assurance over value. And it also provides a competitive environment for new operators where they don't have very high barriers to entry. Essentially 2 hectares of land in CBD areas is a pretty high barrier to entry for most bus operators. So yeah, key strategic asset, not only from a contracting perspective and an asset management perspective, but also from a value perspective for this council.
And then one last question: the one of the really good initiatives, which is probably not going to be funded, the on-demand trial. The IP is still going to be retained, is that correct? And it's probably, would it be safe to say it's about timing and funding, probably in the future, that work could probably come back again?
Through you, the chair, I think there was a lot of lessons learned by the team, and we've all had a few reflections on that. And I think the next time we do explore on demand, and if this council does decide it wants to scale it up, it will be a much quicker process. So I think the IP that we have learned in the process and relationships we've built throughout that process will certainly enable a future rollout. And once again, there are many different providers and means and methods of using on demand. So I think it's been a useful learning journey, I suspect, and it has opened up a few new ideas for the future as well. So yes.
And if I might ask another question, is that all that IP, is that open source or shared with other PTAs?
Through the chair, obviously the IP associated with the application itself belongs to the service provider, which is obviously VIA for us. But in terms of the lessons learned, there are a lot of studies that go around that we do share. There is a Wakatahi study on demand that's currently live, and we are participating in that. And there's also been a variety of studies shared between ourselves, AT, Hawke's Bay, Eken, and a number of other providers. So I think we've all kind of got up to speed in the last 5 years with on demand, and there's quite a lot of useful information on how we can best target those services in the future.
Good stuff. Thanks, Tim.
Right. Any further questions? Mover, Councillor Nash, seconder. Councillor Gaylor. Okay, do either of you wish to speak to? Yes, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Tim, and thanks, team. It is very destabilising to have these funding decisions come our way, and it has been a difficult process for everybody, and it's taken time away from other things we could have been doing to progress our work on public transport, but obviously very necessary. I think just reflecting on some of the questions and the paper itself, there's no way to cut it. This situation does result in worse public transport experiences for people in our region over the next 3 years than there otherwise would have been with other funding decisions. We're doing our best to fill the gap and to make sure things keep going, but it is disappointing, and it will result in worse outcomes for people than we would have planned for. So I think we should be honest about that, and the paper is honest about that. On the other hand, I think we're taking the right kind of posture, which is to continue to invest with our money in the things that matter to people around our public transport network. And that is continuing the services, that is continuing the public amenity around station stops, real-time information, and other core elements around our public transport infrastructure. I don't believe that the current direction of travel on public transport politically from the government in this country will be the future direction. I think it's a blip. It's regressive, and maybe even in this term of government, it will be corrected. But certainly in a future government, I think the value of public transport is unquestionable. A huge number of people rely on it every day in our region. It's a major driver of our economy. It's a major facilitator of social, business, cultural connections. And we all know that implicitly. And I think that
that case will be able to be made. So just want to say thanks to the team for making sure that so many of our projects and initiatives that matter to people every day and to communities will be able to continue. I think it's important that our contributions to the redevelopment of the Golden Mile, our contributions to the second additional public transport route through the city along the Harbour Quays, those two things will continue, and Route 2, which is our busiest route, we'll continue to progress our project to double capacity on that route with articulated buses, as we discussed last week. So there's a lot of good stuff that's still happening. Overall, this is disappointing, but I think we're setting ourselves up to be able to accelerate and scale up our work when the political conditions allow in the future. Thanks. Okay, thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Tuthey.
Thank you. I'd like to share Councillor Nash's disappointment, and just from a Lower Hutt perspective, there's a lot of implication in here for public transport services in Lower Hutt, and there's plenty for me to discuss with the MP for Lower Hutt when I meet with them in 2 weeks' time. There's lower budgets for installing new shelters, and the MP's office has lobbied me to install a new shelter, and here we have $2 million less to do that with. There's the redevelopment of Waterloo Station, which is a tired and very expensive asset that we're pouring money into. It's our leaky pipes part of the network. We're pouring money into keeping it, sweating it along, when we should be investing in something that's fit for purpose for a growing part of Lower Hutt. There's Woburn Station, there's bus priority lanes, there's all sorts of things that would help transport and the residents of Lower Hutt. So from my constituency point of view, there's plenty here for me to discuss with the Member of Parliament. And then just one other point, I guess proud to be part of a council and to support continued investment in accessibility initiatives. So it's been a major focus of us in the public transport space over recent years with our charter and action plan, and with a lot of that not funded by NLTF, that puts us in a difficult position. We could easily cut those and spend that money on something more shiny and newsworthy, and yet that, along with safety improvements, we have prioritised, and we are spending more than our share on keeping that accessibility program going. So I commend us on that strategic direction in here. Thank you.
Okay, any other councillors? If not, okay, so just all those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed? No. Paper passed. Nigel.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to, it's not every day a council gets a $135 million shortfall in anticipated budget, let alone delivering a Metlink service that we are very proud of, all of you. So I just wanted to acknowledge, the council, because actually you have gone through a huge rebudgeting exercise in an extremely short period of time, so we can deliver you an annual plan prior to Christmas in draft form. So I wanted to acknowledge the way in which you all worked to do that, because there's some big decisions and big trade-offs that we never anticipated that we'd ever have to make. And certainly to Sam, Tim, and all the team, the Metlink team, and the finance team that actually help provide that large suite of options to allow you to have the information you need to make considered decisions. I just want to acknowledge it, because it's not an everyday thing. We all know that, but the team have worked incredibly well at incredible speed to provide what is a sustainable Metlink model going into the future, albeit quite different than we anticipated. So just wanted to kind of highlight that at the end of that debate. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Nigel. Moving on to paper 10, which is the appointment of Carterton District Council members to the committee. There are a set of new recommendations, which is basically 2 more recommendations. Lucas, are you putting those on the screen? Yes. Do you just want to talk quickly to the paper, Lucas?
Yep, through you, Chair. After we wrote this report, Carterton District Council advised us that they had made more changes than what we were aware of, which included the changes to the Waiahine River Plan Advisory Committee. So they have requested that we remove Councillor Cherry Campbell and appoint Councillor Della as her replacement on that advisory body. I'm happy to take any questions.
Looks like the result of a minor coup over at Carterton District, doesn't it? Okay, enough said.
Councillor Connolly.
I do recall that gender balance was an issue in some of those, and it looks like we're losing a lady. Can you comment on the current gender balance of those committees?
Of the Waihine River Plain Advisory Committee itself, I think I do have that page open.
So isn't the answer, Lucas, that this is not within our control?
Yes, that is also correct.
I appreciate that we've had this conversation, and that is the answer that's been given before. But I still feel obliged to raise the fact that that we have a stake in these committees, and the gender balance is poor, and Councillor Adrian Staples can only do so much to represent.
I think it's fair to say that there is some background information behind this.
So Koo was not too, was perhaps even a little bit close to the bone. Do I have a mover and a seconder? Councillor Kirkman, Councillor Adrian Staples. Anybody else you either want to talk to it? No. All those in favour, please say aye. Those opposed, no. Paper passed. Might be something I raise at the mural forum. Just a reminder to mayors generally. They'll love me for it. Right. Shareholder resolutions in lieu of the annual general meeting. WRC Holdings Limited. Sarah.
Kia ora koutou. So the purpose of this paper is to seek Council's agreement not to hold an annual general meeting this year for WRC Holdings Limited, and to do what's required by written resolution instead. As sole shareholder, it's not necessary for Council to hold a separate shareholder AGM, and there's many opportunities for engagement with the board if needed. There are no updates since the report was written, and happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions? No, no questions. A mover and a seconder. Councillor Kirkman and Councillor David Bassett. Do either of you wish to speak to the paper? No, no. All those in favour, please say aye. Those opposed? No. Okay, paper passed. Thanks, Sarah. CCO annual reports.
And so this is to provide Council with the 2023-24 annual reports submitted by the Council-controlled organisations. This report has attached to it all 4 final annual reports for the entities, all signed off by the auditors and approved by their respective boards. There's been no updates since this paper was written, and it is provided for your information, but happy to take any questions.
Right, any questions? Councillors? No. David, Ken? No. No. No questions. Thank you. Finance update. Ashwin. Ali.
Thank you, Chair. So this paper presents the financial results of the Council for the first quarter ended September 24. The forecast numbers have been updated based on the first quarter's performance. This gives you a picture of where GW is expected to be by the end of the year. The revenue variance is mainly driven by the NLTF shortfall, especially on the capital projects, procurement delays in Lindrum, and rail fare revenue reduction. The forecast revenue variance is also driven by the same factors, minus the rail fare numbers. So at the time of preparing this paper, the numbers were not available, but Metlink have since completed their the numbers, and the forecast will be available for you in the next month's report. The forecast expenditure variance is mainly driven by the accounting change in the national ticketing solution. At this stage, we are still expecting a balanced budget, but we continue to monitor the revenue shortfall and operating costs quite closely, and we will be providing to you regular updates in subsequent monthly reporting meetings. The forecast capital spend for the year is also, in a way, driven by the NLTF shortfall and Lindrum procurement delays. Earlier this month, Council also renewed a 44 million loan for holdings. This relates to the original Centerport acquisition, I think way back in the 1990s. And since then, we are just renewing the loan on a 3-yearly basis. Happy to take any questions from the councillors.
Any questions, Councillor Connolly?
Two from me. You talk about Riverlink being behind budget due to property purchases. I was a little I thought we'd done the bulk of the property purchases, and in fact, the issue that we had was that we'd purchased a lot of property, but it didn't look like we were actually moving on actually doing anything with the site anytime soon, which was a different risk. So if someone could talk to that, and also just more generally, I had concerns about Riverlink because of factors beyond our control, kind of slipping behind budget and us needing to reforecast that into future years. I also wondered if Julie could just talk on the water supply, concerned about the overspend in the Silver Stream Pipe Bridge, and is that just a forecasting, is that spending money earlier than predicted, or is that actually coming in more expensive than we had anticipated? There's no mention of Timarua there, which I thought was also quite overspent, but that was due to the strategic decision to try to fast track that as much as possible to get that water coming on.
Yeah. So I think with the Riverlink, our understanding is there are still about 5 or 6 properties that are yet to be acquired. I think one of them involves a church, and I think there are still some negotiations going on with it. So that's my understanding. Sorry, on your second question on the Riverlink budget, I think Ali, if you can give an update on that.
I think we won't really know for another couple of months, but in terms of the forecast, we are budgeting for it to have slowed it down by 8 million for this year. So that's the most up-to-date information that we have at the moment. But you're right, we would rebudget it into the following year.
Okay.
Through you, Chair, just on the pipe bridge for Councillor Connolly's question. So that's about the delivery of materials on site coming earlier than expected and therefore needing to pay for them on delivery.
This was, what I'm getting at is this an example of Wellington Water not accurately indicating how much things will cost us, or is this just the bills coming in early?
Timing.
Okay. No other question? Councillor Nash?
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, team. I was wondering about, how Standard & Poor's recently issued a credit downgrade for Upper Hutt City Council. One of the things they talked about was capital investment program and deficits after capital accounts. And I just wondered, I think they said, they estimate Upper Hutt's deficit at 73% of total revenue in fiscal year 2024 and project a deficit of 65% in fiscal year 2025. Just wondering where we are sitting on that same metric. Thanks.
Okay, Standard & Poor's visited yesterday, so extremely timely. They are extremely interested in what our cash flow surpluses and deficits look like, and they also are taking into account, as indicated by that report on Upper Hutt, on the capital spend in that space. Because capital spend draws down on your cash, but then you're using normally debt to fund it, so it actually puts you in a less strong cash position. So this is something they are looking at. We never spend, our revenues, basically $750 million. We spend much less than that per year. Our biggest draw on that at the moment in terms of against revenue is water in the water space. So the water reform will be advantageous to us in the debt headroom space. So at the moment, fine, but it is our debt and our capex levels that will likely impact our credit rating.
But just if we were going to I'm taking from that answer that if we were going to use the exact same metric, because I'm sure Standard & Poor's will.
Yes, they have standard metrics
Yeah,
and
we're,
assessments.
so if they're estimating Upper Hutt at 73% total revenue deficit this year and 65% next year, broadly speaking, I mean, we're going to be nowhere near those numbers, aren't we? So are we going to have a deficit at all in that metric? Would we have any kind of deficit in terms of the revenue, capital expenditure to revenue after capital accounts?
Well, we're well within our debt headroom, but our level of debt is a concern to Standard & Poor's and continues to be so. But that said, we're well within all our benchmarks and the benchmarks of the LGFA, so we are not in any financial difficulty. But it could slightly impact our credit rating, but we will have to wait and see on that.
Thank you. Okay. Cool. For information, so thank you very much. Right, resolution to exclude the public. Do I have a mover and a seconder? Councillor Gaylor and Councillor Saw. All those in favour, please say aye. Those opposed, no. Passed.
We just need a moment, Chair, to do the